Hey guys, recently I made a video about the most dangerous places in the world that are still radioactive after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. But it turns out that's far from being the only dark chapter in the history of nuclear energy. It turns out that the USSR ran several highly unethical experiments on human beings, purposely exposing them to lethal doses of radiation to see what would happen. Today we will tell you the stories of people who became victims of nuclear testing. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, once said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And although he regretted his words, they turned out to be prophetic. The first large-scale victims of nuclear testing were the inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, even after the end of World War II, people continued to be sacrificed to test new types of weapons. In the late 40s and early 50s, the United States conducted Operation Sunshine, a series of nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. In total, 67 atomic bombs were detonated there. As a result, 23 people suffered severe radiation sickness and had to be evacuated to the United States for treatment. The worst affected was a 23-year-old soldier named Johnny Martinovich, who received a fatal dose of radiation while observing the atomic bomb test. He survived for just 28 days. The American government paid out compensation to the families of the victims, but classified the results of the tests for many years. Even after that, they did not fully reveal the terrible consequences of nuclear testing. While the U.S. was busy with the development of the hydrogen bomb, the USSR began to actively explore outer space. On October 4, 1957, Sputnik 2, the satellite carrying a dog named Laika into orbit, was launched into outer space. Laika became the first living creature to be in orbit around the Earth. However, she didn't survive. Her life was only 5 hours. Despite the fact that the temperature regime inside the cabin should have been between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius, it actually reached 40 degrees. Poor animal died from overheating. On December 3, 1959, the USSR carried out its first hydrogen bomb test, RDS-37. For this purpose, they built a special settlement near the Semipalatinsk test site, which was populated by volunteers and prisoners. All of them were told that they were going to take part in the construction of a coal mine. In reality, they were supposed to become human shields during the explosion. However, the blast wave of the bomb destroyed all the buildings before it, so the residents of the settlement found themselves in an open area. Many of them died right on the spot, but some survived. It was decided to evacuate the rest and send them to the hospital. Those who had been working on the construction site were given a choice: either receive a large dose of radiation or get a noble title and a good pension. One of these human shields was Pavel Piskarev. After the test, he developed acute radiation sickness. His skin became covered with ulcers and blisters. Then he went blind and deaf. A year later, he died. Only in 1990 did the scientists finally declassify the case of Pavel and other human shields. On March 2, 1954, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States approved Operation Castle. It was planned to carry out a series of 22 nuclear tests in the Pacific Ocean. One of them involved a device called the Special Atomic Demolitions Munition, or SADM. This is a small thermonuclear warhead designed to destroy bunkers. Scientists estimated that a bunker 20 feet underground could withstand an explosion of up to 10 kilotons of TNT. To confirm this, the Americans needed to blow up a tunnel, so the decision was made to use real people for the experiment. 22 volunteer servicemen entered the tunnel. They had to go down into the shaft at a depth of 30 meters and install an explosive device there. Their job was dangerous, but it was also a great honor, and many people wanted to volunteer for it. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Mentor Pritt won the right to lead this dangerous mission. He personally went over all the safety measures with the military men and divided them into two groups. The first group included the engineers and technicians who were to lay the explosive device, and the second group included observers who were to watch the explosion. Everything was ready, and on March 6th, the military men started to descend into the shaft. Soon a powerful explosion thundered and shook the ground. The power of the SADM was much higher than expected. It was 150 instead of 10 kilotons of TNT. The explosion completely destroyed the shaft and killed all the people who were inside. It was the first time in history that the victims of a nuclear test were not evacuated, but buried right on the spot. Among the dead was the leader of the mission, Harold Minterprit. From May to October 1954, the U.S. military conducted a series of nuclear tests code-named Castle, which were attended by 1,300 servicemen. The Castle Bravo explosion was one of the most powerful thermonuclear bombs ever detonated. Its capacity was 15 megatons of TNT. This is almost twice the power of the bomb that fell on Nagasaki. Castle Bravo was so powerful that it created a cloud of radioactive fallout that spread over a vast territory. 23 servicemen stationed aboard the recovery ship USS received lethal doses of radiation. 5 of them died within a few weeks, but the rest survived. The Americans were prepared for such an outcome and provided generous compensation to the families of the deceased and lifelong benefits to the wounded. Nevertheless, the government tried to hide the consequences of this tragedy. The survivors were forbidden to speak about what happened to them. Doctors forbade them to tell anyone about their terrible disease. And so for decades, servicemen and their families had to suffer alone with their pain and ailments. Moreover, for a long time, the veterans of Castle Bravo were denied medical care. Only in 1990, after one of the surviving nuclear testers committed suicide, did the U.S. government lift the veil of secrecy. It turned out that exposure to radiation caused the development of cancer and other diseases among the military personnel. Survivors often experienced memory loss, hearing and vision problems, and nerve damage. During the Cold War, the Soviet nuclear test site in Semipalatinsk became a creepy place. There, the USSR carried out 473 nuclear tests and seriously damaged the ecology of Kazakhstan. However, even this was not enough for the Soviet military. Therefore, in 1988, they chose another location near the Arctic Circle. An abandoned settlement of Igorsk became the location of the nuclear test site. The Soviets transported several hundred criminals and mentally ill patients there. They were supposed to participate in a series of nuclear tests. However, the test results turned out to be worse than expected. Huge areas were contaminated with radioactive substances, and the patients were forced to evacuate, along with the locals. As a result, 13 people died from acute radiation sickness. The Soviets hid the tragedy from the public and even banned doctors from disclosing information about the terrible disease of the patients. Only a few years later, the truth came out. In 1989, the USSR carried out its last nuclear test. This was the 219th nuclear explosion in total and the 32nd at the Semipalatinsk test site. Once again, they used prisoners as human shields. A group of 14 people descended into a well at a depth of 150 meters. Their task was to measure the seismic vibrations from the explosion. However, the explosion was much more powerful than expected. The radiation literally burned through the shelter. All 14 people died. Their bodies were sent for a post-mortem examination and then buried. 2 of the pathologists who examined the bodies, Murat Kenjiev and Almat Kabdilov, were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union posthumously. Today, dozens of books have been written about nuclear testing. We can find footage of the explosions in various archives. However, we know very little about the victims of these tests. They sacrificed their lives so that we could learn how deadly nuclear weapons are. What do you think? Was it worth it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It's the best way to support us. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.